Ladies and gentlemen, look at my nightmare. It is a 2007 Honda Pilot, and I am checking the crank bearings after 70,000 miles. The crank bearings are damaged. They're making noise. Honda knows about this, so Honda makes me put these things in a tiny little box, takes pictures of them, and I have to send them up to Techline, and then they let me know if only the crank bearings have to be replaced. Which they did. I replaced all the crank bearings. Torqued them all down. Checked everything. Checked the clearances. And like I said, installed new crank bearings. Sorry, crank rod bearings. Used the old bolts. Torqued those down too. And guess what? This was a complete waste of my time. So, customer comes back a couple days later. Techline tells me now that I get to replace the long block on this 2019 Honda Pilot. That involves me putting this vehicle in the air, dropping it down to the floor, the engine and transmission that is. Oh, and by the way, they only give me about maybe 9 hours to replace all this, which I think is kind of stupid. But yes, I have to tear down this whole entire engine, take the engine off of the transmission, take it off of the subframe, and what joy. Here I'm taking off all the intake stuff, the fuel rail insulators, fuel rails, the starter, moving the electrical out of the way, taking this bracket out of the way so I can actually take the starter out, because the starter sits on top in the valley, basically underneath the intake, which is kind of a pain in the butt. Cadillacs used to do this. They used to put the starter on top instead of the bottom. Don't understand why Honda decided to go like this, but whatever. There's that weird old starter, taking that on out. And of course, the water pump cross pipes and the center pipe, as you see, making sure that comes out nicely. Then now for the high pressure fuel rails. Make sure I have all the seals, because you don't want to lose all the seals. Taking out the fuel rail ejector harness. And here's a rare look at your knock sensors. Then it's time to take off all the timing components. Of course, I get my special socket out to take the crank bolt out, pull the crank off, take the timing covers off, which, as you can see, they consist of about 5 bolts on top, and I believe it's about 6-7 bolts on the bottom of this bottom cover that you got to take off so you can access the timing. And of course I need to take this motor mount bracket off, because that's in the way, and that covers the water pump pulley. And then I'm taking off the tensioner. I can get a socket on that bolt, but I can't get a socket on the bottom 10mm bolt because the oil pressure sender is in the way. Since I got the tensioner off, I'm able to just pull the belt right on off. Next, since I have all the timing components off, I'm able to take all 8 of the head bolts off. And note, crack the head bolts by hand, because some people don't like that in the shop. Okay, take the head off very gently, place it on the ground. Hopefully the valves are not stuck open, because yes, you can bend the valves. Then I take the head gasket off, and I do the same thing to the other side. Now mind you, I did cracked these bolts by hand first before I started to use my electric impact. Use the electric impact at least to take them directly out, because it is a pain in the ass sitting there all day trying to crank these things down by hand, or crank them out by hand, that is. And we're going to reuse these bolts, so I'm not going to get rid of those. And I take the gasket off. Now I could have done this while the vehicle was in the air, but I didn't. I got to take all of the flywheel bolts out. Now I have to transfer the flywheel and all 8 of these bolts. Now all 8 of these bolts have to be torqued to 55 foot-pounds, and what I do to make sure that I actually torque every single bolt is I have to put a tick mark, that's just me, put a tick mark with a paint marker on which ones that I have done. And yes, you do see a screwdriver in between the flywheel, because I need something to lock the flywheel down so the flywheel or the engine doesn't turn while I'm trying to torque these things. Now that the flywheel is installed, now I need to focus in on putting the heads back on. And of course, I put the dowel pins in first, because I need the dowel pins to sit in there, because not only to line up the head, but I need to make sure that the gasket stays on too, just like this. Make sure the gasket is placed on there correctly, and that's what the dowel pins also do, not only lining up the heads, but it lines up the gasket. And I got to do the same thing on the other side. 2 dowel pins, 1 head gasket. Now carefully install the head, because you don't want to mangle up the head gasket, because then you're going to be causing some serious problems like coolant leaks and everything else, and you're not going to want to be pulling this thing apart again. So here's my used, no, I can't really say that. Here's my used head bolts that I'm using. Remember I said that we will not discard these? We have to reuse them. You can use new head bolts, but it's really not necessary unless you have a warped head gasket or something like that. And we're going to set this thing to about 22 foot-pounds, and then we're going to set it to 90-degree torque too. So the first thing is, the first torque is going to be the 90, and we're going to do it in this sequence. As you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, number 6, number 7, and number 8. You got to do it in this sequence, basically working from the inside out. This ensures that the head is going to be torqued down correctly. First is 90. Let all the lights light up like this. You see it? Go green. Boom. Now we can move on to the second one. And you're going to repeat this process once if you're using old bolts, twice if you're using new bolts. And for the final torque, you got to do the 22 foot-pounds, and you're going to do it in the same sequence we did the first go around, working from the inside out. You got the one right here, okay, then I switch it to number 2, just right here. Okay, now we need to do the same thing we just did on that head to the other head. So we're carefully placing it onto the dowel pins and installing the head bolts so we won't get everything all screwed up. Slow is fast, ladies and gentlemen. Slow is fast. Installing your old bolts like we did the last head. We're going to torque these things down like I did before, which is going to be the 90-degree first, and then the second and the final, because it's old bolts, we got to do the 22 foot-pounds of torque. Now that I got the heads on, now it's time to put all the timing components on, which I'm starting here with my timing idler. Next is the tensioner idler pulley. You know, the one that moves around. Next is going to be the crank sprocket, along with the shim that holds the sprocket onto the crankshaft. Don't forget that shim, because you'll be really screwed if you do. Now I take a paint marker so I can mark my marks. On the back side you got this little mark right here and that mark right there. Then on the front you'll see a number 1, and then it has a little bit of a mark there, and then a mark on the back side. That's how you know that's in time. And then on the bottom you can see that this has got an arrow, and then there's an arrow on the crank sprocket. And also you can actually know that it's 12 o'clock with that shim there. If you see the shim right here, I'm going to back it off by about 1 tooth, because there's a reason for that. So when I'm installing this belt, I want to make sure they're in all of the grooves, and I'm going to route it as you see here. Now the left side is going to be the side with the slack. The right side is the part that I need no slack in, and that's the reason for turning the crank sprocket back just a tooth. Gonna line them all up into the grooves, going around this idler pulley, and then around the sprocket, and get them all in the grooves there. It can be a little bit of a pain in the butt, but make sure they're all in there. And if you see right here, I'm going to turn the sprocket back that 1 tooth, and you'll see the tension grab. See there? It's tight right there. That's what you want. The left side needs to be the loose side to where I can put the tensioner on, but the right side, I want to get all that tension out before I even install that tensioner. And I can check my marks to make sure I didn't move them around. And I put the paint markers on there so I can see better, because I'm about blind as of a bat. Now I can go ahead and install my tensioner. It's 2 10mm bolts, like I said. The one bolt you can get with a socket, but the other bolt you can't, because it sits right behind that oil pressure sender. And yes, that is a pain in the butt. You can only get a wrench in there, which, you know, that's another engineer design fail to me, but that's another story. As soon as I get all these bolts on, I can pull the pin, and this engine is timed. So if you ever have to do a timing belt, that's how it's done. Well, a timing belt on a Honda Pilot 3.5 liter. Now before I put all the timing covers back on, I want to make sure all my timing marks are in time. The bottom, up and down. The left side, up and down. Right side, up and down. And the other thing I do is I spin the engine by hand too, to make sure that it's still in time after our 2 turns basically of the full revolutions, that is. But now I'm putting the motor mount bracket back on and the timing covers, which all of those 10mm bolts need to be put back on. Hopefully you didn't lose them. This is actually the easiest part, is putting these plastic covers back on. It's tedious work, but like I said, it's actually fairly easy. And it's a lot easier when the engine is actually out of the vehicle. And don't forget the crank pulley, which I actually had to take some of that styrofoam off just so I can put the crank pulley back on. And on the crank pulleys, you're going to want to put an impact on that. Don't hand tighten that. People don't have enough power to put that on. So always, always, always put some air on it, as you see here. Now we're almost home free, guys. We got to put the knock sensors back in, tighten those two 10mm bolts, along with the injector harnesses, both sides, and plugging up the high pressure pump, and plugging each injector up It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but you'll be able to get it. Really tight space. Hope you guys got small fingers. Here we go. Make sure all the seals are inside them. The weather seals, I mean. You don't want to get these things short-circuiting out, because then you'll have some other problems. So that's plugged up. Get all the outside plugs all lined up so they can be plugged up with the engine harness later. Now it's time for the intake gaskets. Always replace these if you can. I think they're reusable, but if you're rebuilding an engine, might as well just put new gaskets in. Now for the fuel rails. Make sure you tighten up all 12 of these injector rails. And make sure the high pressure pump gets tightened down very good. You don't want that to start leaking. Spraying fuel all over your engine, that's not good. And of course, your water pump cross pipe. Replace these O-rings, because if you don't replace these O-rings and they start leaking, you're gonna have some other issues too, along with those fuel leaks if you don't replace the seals. And of course, the outlet pipe gaskets on both sides. And then the other cross pipe, the major one. Make sure you line it up. It is a pain in the butt to line up, but at least it's got this little dowel pin that goes in this little slots that you can actually see. Now, yes, I fast forwarded mostly. All the engine components are put back on, but mostly the top stuff like the valve cover gaskets and the plastic intakes, those are pretty much self-explanatory. Now I need to just mount this thing up to the transmission. And there we go. Well, a little bit. I actually had to cut this pallet out just so I can actually get my engine hoist up to it. Sometimes you just gotta, use your noggin on some things to get these engine lined up. Now, very carefully. Now, two people, this would be easy to do, but since it's just me, I gotta be very, very careful and do this thing as slow as possibly can, and at least get it close enough. And once I get it close enough, like you see here, I installed the two big side 17mm bolts. that'll give me enough room to actually mount this thing up. And there's one of the bolts that's on the side. I line it up. I at least put one in the front. At least get it started. And then one, actually this is still the front one actually. But get some of the threads started. And then on the back side, I do the same thing. I put another bolt in there. And you see that the transmission and the transmission has a dowel pin that sits right above that bolt, because you're going to want to install that correctly. Now once I get those two bolts in and I'm actually able to turn them, I can actually sandwich the transmission and the engine together. Now I still have this thing suspended by the engine hoist, but I'm about to take it off right now because that's pretty much all I need. So I'm moving the engine hoist out of the way. Get that out of here because I got to put a car on top of this engine, and that will be in the way. Oh, here's the old engine. There's one thing I did forget, and that is this oil leveling sensor. That will be a little bit of a help because the new one doesn't come with that sensor. And of course I'm installing the ridiculously weird starter, and I fast forwarded and put all that stuff back on, like the the engine coils, the valve cover, and now I'm gonna mate the vehicle to the engine. Now I gotta line it up. I don't want to smash anything. I gotta keep checking around, because there is plastic things that will smash and break, and you'll be having some more problems. So go very, very slow, even though this video looks like it's been sped up, because it is, but I am steadily looking around, making sure nothing is actually pinching or breaking or cracking, and so far so good.
Yeah, so what?
Now I got all the bolts in there, and they're started good enough to where I can actually pull the engine up, because doing stuff on your back sucks, especially when you're 45 years old. If you don't have to be on your back, don't be on your back. So I'm lifting it up in the air so I can tighten down all 12 of these subframe bolts. So you got the one subframe bolt, and then you got the two bolts to hold these braces on. You're on all four sides of this. So tighten them up, then you should be good. And of course you gotta hook up everything else, like the drive shafts and all your electrical and whatnot. I didn't want to make this video very, very long, because you'd probably just click off of it and be like, man, hey, this thing's way too long. But that's all you have to do, put the subframe in, and of course hook up the drive line. And absolutely do not forget to put the torque converter bolts back in, because you're not going to go anywhere if you don't put those in. Now that the engine's put back together, it's time for the cold start.
first startup since we replaced the short block on this 2019 Honda Pilot. So far so good. No check engine light. And no noise. Yes sir. Do a couple of baby revs.
Push past all the pain and you find a door. Open it up and finally explore everything that you thought you could never do before. And even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go.